What exactly is self-concept and how do you use it in manifestation? Hey, I'm Dan. Welcome. I talk about manifestation, conscious creation, intentional living, all that good stuff. Thank you for joining me. And today I really want to dive deep into this topic of self-concept and how I like to describe it and how to use it in manifestation to get what you want and live the life of your dreams. So self-concept, you probably heard it everywhere because everyone always talks about it. It's a phrase that's kind of come up in the last few years that's super popular. When you hear manifestation, when you hear about identity, you hear about self-concept. So what exactly is self-concept, right? Self-concept is how you see yourself, what you say to yourself, how you perceive yourself, how you assume the world treats you, how you treat yourself. All of those things compose of what we call as self-concept. And self-concept is part of this thing called an identity that we have. Now, as you know, I teach manifestation. The simplest way is through identity shifting. So identity part of that identity is your self-concept. So all these things that you think about yourself, that you say to yourself, right? They are all part of your self-concept. And why is this so important to manifesting? Well, as we know, manifestation means letting go of the old identity, shifting into a new identity that has what you want, that has your manifestation, right? And embodying that identity. When you are embodying that new identity, you will have a particular self-concept, how you view yourself, how you see the world. Okay? So that is why it's so important to be aware of what your self-concept is. What are you telling yourself? Because that makes up your identity. Remember, your identity is the basis. What you are embodying as your new identity is the basis of your manifestation. You are not manifesting a particular thing or a person. You are always manifesting yourself. You're manifesting a version of you, an identity of you. And that identity, self-concept is part of that. Now, I really want to quickly go over the topic of ego because ego is linked to your identity as well. Your old identity has an ego that's also linked to its self-concept, old self-concept. Everyone always talks about shifting from your old self-concept, right, to your new self-concept. Right, so that's correct. You want to shift from your old self-concept to your new self-concept because you're shifting from your old identity to your new identity. And this self-concept is also linked to an ego. So when we're talking about ego, right? Because you're always going to have an ego. As long as you're living and existing in this 3D reality, as far as I know, and as far as the people that I've encountered, no one that I encountered doesn't have an ego. Maybe if you go to like Buddha or Jesus or one of those, figures that have really transcended, you're an ascended master, maybe. But for the majority of people, you're going to go through 3D reality and living life with an ego. You don't have to be afraid of the ego. You just have to be aware that you are not the ego, that you have the choice to choose. From your ego is going to sprout a lot of thoughts, a lot of beliefs, right? That's going to hold you back. That is linked to your self-concept. And this is why it's so important to be aware that that's not really you. Take a step back away from that because you want to let go and detach from that old identity, the old self-concept, the old ego, and shift into your new identity, your new self-concept. And yes, guess what? There is an ego attached to your new self-concept and new identity as well. The great thing about this is that you are awareness. So at some point in your life, your new identity, let's say you've manifested what you wanted, right? At some point, there's going to be expansion and growth. And you're going to get to that point where you are living as your new identity. You've gotten what you want to manifest. And there's going to be something that you want to manifest even more. Or there's going to be some way of living that you want to live that you're not currently living, even as that new identity. Well, that new identity can then become your old identity. That new self-concept is now your old self-concept. That new ego is now your old ego. And you have always the power through your awareness to shift and change from that. You can let that go, right? Because at that point in time, your new identity is now your old identity and old self-concept. You can let that go and then adopt a new embody a new identity, a new self-concept. And yes, an ego will be attached to that as well. So don't be too worried about like ego being attached to your self-concept, being attached to your identity, because that when we are existing in this 3D reality, it's going to happen regardless, okay? But the important thing I want you to understand is that you have to be aware of your ego because your ego is going to tell you that your old self-concept is you. It's not you. So when you are shifting your self-concept to be able to shift your identity, you need to understand that ego is going to come up with beliefs that simply are not true. It just needs something to attach to. And guess what? Once you have your new identity, you're going to have a new self-concept and you have a new ego that's going to be attached. So that's how I like to explain self-concept. The reason why I like to bring in ego is because a lot of times that brings up the most challenge in when we're trying to change and shift our self-concept. Because look, I understand. A lot of teachers and coaches out there will tell you, well, you have to shift your self-concept. You have to tell yourself new things. You have to tell yourself new things. You have to tell yourself that this is who you are now and this is not who I am. Okay, well, here is the problem with that, right? When you are shifting your self-concept, your ego is going to pop up because you're still living as if your old identity. You're still living from your self-concept of your previous self. And that ego is going to pop up and cling to it and tell you things about yourself, which is part of your self-concept. All those thoughts are ego, right? By the way, that are not really you. Remember, you are not ego, you're awareness. You can step back and choose a new one at any point in time, right? So the reason I talk about ego in this context is because you need to be aware of how to manage that so you can detach from the old self-concept and actually work on developing this new self-concept. In fact, it's not really about developing a new self-concept because all creation is already done. You're basically choosing an identity and taking on a particular self-concept that surrounds that. Now, why do I talk about self-concept so much? Because, and why is it important in how I like to manifest? Because when you are selecting this new identity that you're embodying, that has the manifestation that you want or living the life that you want to live, that in itself is going to have a particular self-concept. Remember, all creation is done. So it's about identifying what that self-concept is. How does that person think about themselves? How do they perceive themselves? What are assumptions that they have about themselves and the world? And how does the world see them? What do they think the world sees them? Or how do they think the world sees them? That's all part of that self-concept, that new self-concept that you're trying to embody. So the key to actually, one of the keys to being able to embody this new self-concept, is embody this new identity to be able to manifest, is by dissecting the self-concept of this new identity, right? And not being afraid of the ego that's holding you back with the old identity and the old self-concept. You have to detach from that, right? So yes, self-concept. What exactly is it? Why is it important? Why do we want to shift it? To summarize, self-concept is how you perceive yourself, okay? And you're always going to have self-concept because you're always going to come from a particular identity. You want to detach from your old identity, which means detaching from your old self-concept and taking on a new identity that already has its self-concept. You can use the self-concept to help you figure out how that new identity behaves and lives, and then be able to easily embody that and slip into that. I'll leave it there for today. I hope that's able to help clarify what self-concept really means and how you can use it to supercharge your manifesting. All right? I'll see you guys soon.